So I've been theory crafting builds and diving into the game like crazy over the past couple of weeks, and today I have my Twisting Blades leveling rogue build. Now, with the leveling build, I'm considering 1 to 50 because at level 50 we unlock Paragon and World Tier 3 and all this different stuff that throws so many different wrenches into the plan. And we also only care about the Codex of Power legendary items because those are the ones we can guarantee get from the dungeons, seeing as we can access the other acts earlier on into the game according to the beta quest log. Now, if you are someone who just cares about the information, I will leave a link to this build on d4builds.gg in the description, as well as my spreadsheet that shows the allocation of every single point. I'm slowly updating it as I actually create videos and create more builds that I have on like notepads and stuff. So if you guys want the actual just data and don't want to listen to anything, there are some key points that you might want to know for the build and how it operates, but that's going to help you all kind of figure out the build. With that being said, let's dive into the skills. So when I'm considering the skill choices and what we want to go with, I am considering two things. I want mobility and single turret damage and enough AoE to kind of be decent in a lot of dungeon scenarios. So in this build, we have Twisting Blades, which is already good enough in terms of AoE damage because it actually works with another skill. On top of that, we are going to be taking advantage of the rogue's insane mobility skills, at least until we get the mount, which hopefully will arrive around Act 2 or Act 3, as we've kind of been alluded to. With that said, the skill tree starts off with Puncture and running into Fundamental Puncture. Obviously, you're going to want to put 2 points and then come down for Twisting Blades and then pick up Fundamental Puncture because Twisting Blades is their main damage dealing skill. But Fundamental Puncture is crucial because this gives us permanent vulnerability because it just applies if you hit 2 of the 3 blades on the basic. And since we're melee, we're always going to be hitting those 2 blades on elites and bosses, which is 20% permanent damage and the ability to work with some vulnerable effects in the later parts of this build. Huge bonus there. Then we pick up Twisting Blades after those initial 2 points. And then we're going to go for Advanced Twisting Blades. Now, this did get nerfed, but I don't think the nerf is that insane in the early game. It is, and it does fall off as we get later on in the game because the daze effect from improved Twisting Blades gets a lot better when we can combo things that work with crowd control or things and skills that work with daze. This becomes really, really powerful. But in the early game, we do not have access to those legendaries and we do not have access to those skill points, so it's not nearly as good. Therefore, I much prefer reducing my cooldowns on some agility skills and some utility skills as we get them. So we're going to be picking up Advanced Twisting Blades, 1 more point into Twisting Blades, and then head down for Dash and then Shadow Step. Now you might be wondering, why are you running Shadow Step? We don't have it in the build later on. That is because, again, we want to use Shadow Step early on to traverse the open world, because in the open world, it's hard to reset our cooldowns with Twisting Blades because the monsters are much more spread out, and we will not have a mount early on into the game. However, once we do get our mount, we can replace this with a later skill, Shadow Clone. So I'm presuming that we're getting our mount around 25. They did say around Act 2 or Act 3, so that's what I'm guessing. Well, they said continue the campaign, and they alluded to Act 2 or Act 3. So we're going to be picking up Shadow Step early on, and we're going to be removing it later on. If you want to know exactly when I do that, it's going to be around level 26, I believe, and that shows in my spreadsheet. But after we picked up Dash and Shadow Step, we're going to come back up and finish off Twisting Blades, and then we're going to come down here to pick up Concealment. Concealment is huge. It allows us to have a form of Unstoppable when we remove Shadow Step, which is really, really important to break CC. It actually gives us Stealth, which actually is a get-out-of-jail-free card in a lot of scenarios, and it gives us a little bit of movement speed to kind of run around the dungeons quicker, but also energy for enhanced concealment and countering concealment. The energy is huge because 40 energy allows us to essentially make 1 1/3 more Twisting Blades, which is really, really massive actually. And of course, when we get additional energy regenerations, this gets even better. But the guaranteed critical strike actually works extremely well with a later skill that we're going to be picking up. Now, in order to unlock the Poison Imbuement, we need to go ahead and put a couple more points into some other abilities. So we're going to go with Exploit. Exploit is just a really, really nice amount of damage increasing due to it just amping up our damage against healthy and injured enemies, which works about half the time against bosses because, you know, above 80 and below 35. But against normal monsters, it works most of the time because oftentimes when you hit something with this increased damage, you'll get them down to the injured status, and then the next portion of damage from Twisting Blades is going to wrap it up. So we put 2 points into Exploit, and then we're going to head down to Poison Imbuement and go 1 point Poison Imbuement, and then Enhanced Poison Imbuement, and then Blended Poison Imbuement. This is where we see the power of Concealment plus Poison Imbuement. Now, this skill got buffed, but what's even more insane is with the guaranteed crits and Blended Poison Imbuement, we're going to get 75% increased poisoning damage. This is huge. This is very, very huge, because if you did not know, the legendary aspect Blade Dancers, which we're going to go over later on, and the Twisting Blades itself, the pullback also counts as the poison imbued skill. So if you stab someone, that's going to be poisoning them, and then the rip back is also going to poison them, which means that this is actually an AoE skill with the spinning with Blade Dancer's aspect and just hitting other targets. So the critical strike can apply to all the elites around you, all the normal monsters around you, and all the different characters and targets around you, which makes this extremely powerful. Okay, extremely powerful. After we pick up Blended Poison Immunity, we're going to head back up for Exploit, and then we're going to go 3 points into Weapon Mastery. Now, an important thing about this, I much prefer swords over daggers. Even though daggers hit faster, swords are just going to give us permanent damage increasing, which is generally a little bit better than daggers against bosses. Okay, after Weapon Mastery, we're going to pop back over here, and this is when we're going to remove that Shadow Step, because we're going to be around level 25. We're going to pop back up and pick up Sturdy. Now you might say, Sturdy, that's not a damage dealing skill. You're right, it's not. I'm going to go 1 point into Sturdy, because we need to put 1 point to unlock Shadow Clone, because we're going to be removing a point from Shadow Step. So 1 point here to give us close damage reduction. We're pretty much always going to be in melee range, at least against bosses. So this is really nice against bosses. And then we're going to come down here for Shadow Clone, which gives us essentially 60% DPS increase, because this is going to copy everything except for our imbued skills. But the Twisting Blades itself are going to be absolutely destroying everything. And then we're going to go for Prime Shadow Clone, which gives us another form of Unstoppable, which is really, really good against bosses. And then lastly, Supreme Shadow Clone for additional 20% more damage. Then we're going to head back up and finish off Sturdy for additional damage reduction. Do not underestimate damage reduction. Yes, I want more damage, but around this point, at least from the beta, around level 20, 25, you start to actually take some damage. And assuming you didn't grind out legendary items in Core Dragon, you actually don't one-shot everything after all. So getting a little bit of damage reduction is going to really help you out. Then we're going to come down and pick up Malice, 3 points into Malice. This is 9% increased damage against elites and bosses, because we have permanent vulnerable in our kit. Super, super powerful. Then we're going to come down here and pick up Adrenaline Rush. This is really, really important for our overall build, because we're going to be stabbing things with Twisting Blades and then moving along. We're always moving. We just stop for a quick second to stab things and then go and dash through enemies to potentially, reset our cooldowns, and then we're going to continue moving on. So this is really going to help us when we're going through dungeons. And then we're also going to be picking up, as soon as we hit level 35, or 36 rather, the Close Quarters Combat. The key passives here are very, very nice. Now, Momentum is where you start to see, okay, the Dazed Twisting Blades is actually really, really solid. The only problem with this is that you can't really get a lot of effectiveness out of this skill when we're fighting bosses, and so the Close Quarters Combat ends up being a little bit better overall in this build, in my opinion, but I would see an argument for the Momentum. I think this is also very good and going to be, in my opinion, the one we're going to be going for in endgame. So we're going to pick up Close Quarters Combat and then come back and finish off Adrenaline Rush. Then we're going to be going for Aftermath. Aftermath gives us 75 energy when we use Shadow Clone. This is huge for nuking down bosses, okay? Then we're going to come back up and finish off Poison Imbuement. Then we're going to pick up 1 point into Deadly Venom, and then 3 points into debilitating Toxins. This is going to give poisoned enemies, which is everyone because it turns into an AoE skill, 15% less damage. So 15% DR is huge, huge, huge. Then we're going to go ahead and finish off Deadly Venom, and that wraps up our level 50 build. Increased poisoning damage, again, when we're increasing our poison damage so much because we're guaranteed crits, this is going to be big as well. Now diving into the gear or Codex of Power legendaries. Once again, we do not use any legendary that you aren't going to guarantee be able to get. The first one and most important one is the Blade Dancer's aspect, okay? This Blade Dancer's aspect makes it so that when you go ahead and use your twisting blades, they're going to orbit around you after they return, dealing additional damage based on the return damage and based on the distance the blades have traveled, okay? This is huge because what this does is it actually allows you to apply the poison imbuement in an AoE fashion around you after it returns to you. This is the most important aspect with this build and allows you to cruise through any dungeons. If you guys use this in a beta, it is absolutely nuts and absolutely destroys, okay? It does do a lot of additional damage, especially with our energy spamming with the bosses, with all the energy regeneration and our specialization, which is going to be inner sight, which I'll go over a little bit later on. This is going to be huge. And the reason why we're putting it on the bow is because we're not going to be replacing our bow ever. Except for maybe like every 20 levels when we get a massive stat increase. The reason this is because when you have an aspect on a weapon that you're not using, the damage of that weapon doesn't count towards any of your skills, but the aspect will. So if we put it on our dagger, for one, it's not going to be as strong because two-handed weapons give 100% bonus, but also we're going to have to replace it all the time. So our only options are the two-handed weapon or the jewelry here, which I decided to go with the bow because I want the most effectiveness for our Blade Dancer's aspect. Now on the amulet, we're going to be running Edge Master's aspect, which works extremely well with our specialization, as well as just in general for managing our resources properly and regenerating our energy properly. We're going to get potentially 20% increased damage. Well, in the codex, it's the minimum, so 10% increased damage plus 50%, so 15% increased damage based on our primary resource, which is really, really nice. Then we have Aspect of Corruption. This is additional potency of imbuement skill. What this means essentially against vulnerable enemies, which is every boss and every elite, we're going to do 20% increased damage with our imbuement skill, which works extremely well with our poison imbuement guaranteed crits. Lastly, we're going to be running Ravenous Aspect, and this really kind of shoes together all of the different portions of the build when we're clearing out minions, because when we kill a vulnerable enemy, we're going to get 50% increased energy regeneration. This is really nice through just clearing out content in terms of dungeons or anything really, because what you'll do is oftentimes you can cast a basic running through a group and then put some twisting blades, dash through them, the twisting blades will finish them off, and then guess what, you're going to increase your regeneration. And then also if you use this on elites and you have a couple of elites around you, you can basic them, give you that energy regeneration, which is going to be huge for just clearing out trash. This one's probably the least important one out of the entire build. The only reason this one would be really good is if you are doing a lot of trash clearing and you struggle for your energy. However, if you're using your poison imbuement properly and you're using your twisting blades properly, this one isn't nearly as useful. The two that I would say are the most important are Blade Dancer's aspect and Edge Master's aspect. These are super important. And then Aspect of Corruption is going to be a nice third option. And then obviously Ravenous Aspect. There's a few other ones that are good. For example, one of the really solid one is Aspect of Disobedience. This is a armor piece one. It does unlock in the Codex of Power, but with your armor pieces, you're generally going to be replacing those a lot more often because they are crucial for your survivability. But if you have a nice aspect like Disobedience here, you might want to place it on because getting extra armor is going to help your survivability a ton. Now let's talk specialization. I've alluded to this in the video so far, but I prefer inner sight. Combo points is really excellent, to be honest. And what's really interesting about combo points is that because we're going to be wanting to use our basic to keep up that vulnerable uptime, it's not like we're really losing DPS a whole lot for going combo points. The thing with combo points though is that it pales in comparison with inner sight when it comes to boss DPS, and that's what I care most about. Inner sight, what it does is it marks random enemies, and when it's a boss scenario, it's just going to mark the boss, and when we hit those enemies, we're going to gain a gauge bar and fill it up, and then after it's full, we're just going to spam out unlimited energy skills. And with Edge Master's aspect, it works extremely well. And of course, if we're spamming out skills, we're going to get massive value with our Shadow Clone, which is also going to be spamming out those skills with us. So Inner Sight to me is far superior for boss DPS, and again, that's what we're really concerned with. Preparation here. The problem with preparation is that you should be able to kill a boss within the duration of your Shadow Clone. 15 seconds is oftentimes more than enough in the early leveling process to nuke down a boss, at least from what we saw during the leveling process of the beta, right? So when we're using this, we don't really care about the skill cooldown reduction for our ultimate. However, when we use an ultimate, skill resets all the other cooldowns. But if we look at what cooldowns we have poison imbuement and concealment. So essentially what we're going to get is poison imbuement, and then we're going to go into concealment because we want to get value for our reset cooldowns, right? So we get a guaranteed crit off that poison imbuement, pop our Shadow Clone, concealment again, which allows us to hit that other imbuement with a guaranteed crit. So essentially we get 2 guaranteed crits and then 2 additional poison imbued twisting blades. This is good. This is very good, but it's not as good as Inner Sight, because remember, this Inner Sight can proc multiple times in a boss fight, whereas this one, you're gonna have to get back to your ultimate cooldown to reset all your other cooldowns. And spending 100 energy is not necessarily easy, considering we only have like about 150 or so energy regeneration in this build, which means that maybe we'll get like 20 or 30 seconds off our cooldown, but Shadow Clone's cooldown is 60 seconds, so you're really not going to get this more than once a fight in terms of bosses, even if the boss fight lasts for more than 15 seconds. However, if the boss fight lasts for, let's say, 9 or 10 seconds, you could potentially get 2 triggers of Inner Sight in that same fight, which is really, really ridiculous. And Inner Sight just makes everything so absurd when we're considering boss fights. Now, there's so many other things to consider when we're considering these builds, but I do want to talk a little bit about stats, not in depth, but some stats that I personally would go for and actually try to save in my build, even if another piece of armor gives me a little bit of DPS increase, but has a worse stat. First off is damage with core skills. This is going to be huge because Twisting Blades is our main damage dealing skill. Damage versus close, because we're always going to be close to our opponents when we're fighting bosses or elites. Critical strike damage, because we're going to be guaranteed critting with our concealment. And lastly, vulnerable damage. Vulnerable damage is huge because we have permanent vulnerable with our basic. With that being said, that kind of wraps up the build here for us. Obviously, we don't consider Paragon. We only consider the first level 50 levels, and that will help you all through your initial leveling process. I have in-depth tested this build before in the previous betas, 1 to 25, and I've also tested it in the most recent beta, and Twisting Blade still does massive damage. The only difference is that its cooldown reduction cycling is a little bit less, but with this build, and with the energy regeneration, you shouldn't really need to go through multiple skill rotations for bosses. You only will want the cooldown reduction for getting around in dungeons. So dash reducing, concealment reducing, or even things like poison imbuement reducing, so that you can just nuke through everything as you're running through a dungeon. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think about this build, and let me know if you guys have any other builds yourselves. I'll be uploading a ton of different builds coming over the next few days. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.